Okay, everyone. Also to let you know that the replay links, any of the slides that I'll send, any resources mentioned, that we all go to the follow-up emails and give me at least a day or two, depending on when the video get processed through Zoom. Okay. All right, thank you. For question time, I will have breaks in between the presentation at certain point, just so that people have a chance to ask me questions. Like I said, if you don't want to be on camera and be recorded when you ask the question, go ahead and just chat it to me privately in the chat. So hold your question until then. Have your pen and paper handy, write down the questions, any notes that you would like to take. The slides will be sent out, so you don't need to fervently write down everything on it. Next would be on confidentiality. Like I said, any sharing at all, it will not be recorded. And anything that we hear here today, of course, if we can try to keep it within our interweb and do not share it, have any identifiers at all without permission from the speaker. That's okay with everyone. Next things on the agenda would be on respect. And that just means protecting our space, making sure that you're not being distracted. So if you can keep yourself muted, if there's going to be a lot going on in the background, and phone, have the notification turned off, that sort of thing, just for this time, about an hour and a half that we'll be spending together. That would be great. All right, everyone good with that? Okay. Next will be freedom of participation. So here you are in no way obligated to participate in any of the activities at all. And if you do choose to, it'll be up to you about how much and to what amount you would like to share or participate in. Everything is free will here. If you need to leave early, that is okay as well. No issue there. Okay. And lastly is self-care. Any feelings that may come up today, I would like to say that it is welcome to have it being present, and, go ahead and take care of yourself physically, mentally, taking any bio break that you need, having your water there to help you just, ground, feeling that you can be present here as much as possible. And if it gets too much, feel free to turn off the camera, the video, mute this presentation to just take a moment for yourself. And that's totally okay as well. If possible, if you can, chat it to me so I know that, it's not due to internet connection or anything. That would be great. All right, so that's what I have as far as logistics and good norms goes. Does anyone have anything that they would like to add or clarify? You can raise your hand, speak now. Everyone's good? Okay. All right, Ramona, sounds great. Thank you. I hope your internet is good and working there. All right, got a thumbs up. Oh, perfect. I can see your icon. Yes, that would be great. Should. All right, looks like everyone is in agreement here. Thank you, ladies. Okay. So let us all take 3 deep arriving breaths together, just to ground ourselves to this moment before we get into the material. Right, you can do it with me here. So let's take this first one. Deep breath in and out. And next one. In and out. And the last one, you can when you breathe out with a sigh. Oh. That feels great. Okay. And just to really, really mix this very safe and contained for everyone, I would like you to find an object in your environment. It's closest to you if you can't move too much. Find an object that really, when you look at it, it makes you feel safe, warm, comforted. Have it near you. Something be nice if it's tactile. So look around, see what you can find as a safety object for you today. And I'll show you mine. This is him. I don't have a name for him yet, but he'll be here next to me. Just whenever I'm feeling like a little anxious or a little aroused, or just feeling, floating, then I can go ahead and reach out for him and just kind of give it a nice little squeeze. So I encourage you to do the same if you need it. It'll be awesome if like anyone feel comfortable enough, you can go ahead and show on video what your object is. I'll be really curious to know.
So my 5-year-old daughter has been really it's so cute. She's been really taking care of me because I haven't been feeling well. And so every night she's been tucking me in with her stuffies. So I actually have one of her stuffies next to me. So that's going to be my object. I love seeing that other people have stuffies too. Yay.
Yes.
Very
Stuffies
cute.
are the best.
Yeah, my stuffy, I also have a stuff. Well, I'm in a play therapy class, so I've been collecting more of my stuffies, and I'm like, oh, they're fun for me.
Oh, hi, Catherine. Yay, nice to see you.
I work in a school, and this is from one of the vendors, one of their logos, and it's a squeeze toy.
Yes. Is there a name? Does anyone name their stuffy? If you don't have a name, that's okay. And then Bro here say, grab an artisan flower that was a souvenir from a trip with a friend. Oh, yes. Awesome. All right, looks like everyone got their object handy. Now we can get started and get to the good stuff, right? All right. Is everyone able to see the slide? Perfect. All right, here we go. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge and honor the beauty, richness, and vast diversity within the Asian and Pacific Islanders culture, history of the past and present. Today is meant to be a small overview on the topic of shame and mental health through an intersectional lens. And it's not a comprehensive representation of everyone's experiences within the AAPI community, Asian or American culture. I would encourage you to take what resonates with you and leave the rest. At times, you might feel like there's a lot of information coming to you. Again, just take in as much as you can, and you can always come back to it later. I'm also not claiming to be an expert, just a fellow traveler who wants to share what I've learned from my own journey and experiences. I believe that we're all here to learn from each other. So I would like to ask that we can extend some grace to one another for any oversight in advance. Of course, any feedback is welcome and greatly appreciated. Thank you for your understanding. So just quick note here, who am I? So you know what my material is filtered through. I am a 1.5 generation Chinese Vietnamese American woman and is the oldest among my 4 siblings. And being 1.5, that just means that I was born outside the US and I came here before the age of 10. My dad is Chinese, but he lives in Vietnam, and my mom, she is Vietnamese. So that is my heritage there. Prior to becoming a healer and doing this work, I was an optometrist for about 10 years. I work in all different settings and that was another life in itself. And then in 2017, there was a personal crisis that led to an acute psychotic break. And also accompanied with that is a spiritual awakening. So I survived both of those. And that's where a lot of my experience, my lived experience comes from. And it also, I felt a calling from my soul at the time to do some deeper healing work. And that's how I came into the work of shame and trauma. And now I use those lessons to help those in the AAPI community who are struggling with shame to see their pain and suffering through new eyes and perspective. And hopefully you get to see a glimpse of that today. And since shame, it is something that's deeply held in the body and not just the mind, as a whole body experience. I find the best way is to use an integrative mind and body experiential approach to healing it. And I'll share what that means later on. So very, very basic stuff here about shame. And part of my mission really is to help de-shame shame, if that's possible. I believe it is. So the three basics here I want you to know is that shame is a universal, natural, and normal part of the human experience. We're all born with the capacity to feel shame, just not all the time. And we mainly learn shame through being shamed. That's a process of socialization, conditioning, and of course, experiences of trauma. So whenever we talk about shame, we have to name the elephant in the room. Whatever we don't name become part of the shadow, and it kind of lurks around, gets bigger and scarier, and we become less able to really understand it. So let's name it. Again, I would encourage that you be present with yourself as much as possible. Notice any feeling, discomfort that arise in your body today as we're going through this. And that is why we have our healthy, trusty, stuffy object with us to help ground us. Each one of these can be its own talk, but really quickly here, it is a primary emotion, according to Sylvan Tomkin, who was one of the researcher on affect theory. And he was the one to come up with an affect theory. And he also said that shame not only as a primary emotion, it's also an affect attenuator. That means it actually helps bind to other primary emotions and affect its intensity, usually turning it down. It's like a sympathetic break in the body. It kind of stops us from doing something, usually as a survival mechanism. And it's also can be seen as a social emotion, right? Because we are social animals, and that's usually primary ways that we feel shame from. Just something as simple as being left unread, nobody responding to your text or your email, that can provoke that shaming experience where it freezes our body, we don't know what to think, or we probably go into rumination of like, what did I do wrong, or did they hate me, that sort of thing, and it really get us going down the rabbit hole there. That's one way it can show up. And of course, it can become, or course, self-belief. These are usually the negative self-beliefs that we think about ourselves that just really, really difficult to shake, no matter, regardless of the evidence that we see around us. And and of course, it can get big enough to become an entire state of being. Just walk around with this big old shame cloud over our head that we can just never find any sunshine anywhere, and thinking that it's just us, and it's very, very isolating. So that is to, give you really a big sense of how big this elephant is. And today we're only touching the surface of it. So purpose of shame, it usually serves three main purposes. The first one, it is a survival defense. When shame comes up, it triggers a submissive physiological response to help protect us from getting ostracized from the tribe or family when we misbehave, especially when we're young and helpless and we totally dependent on our caregivers, right? To be ostracized that young in the wild, it means death. We can't protect ourselves at that moment. So so shame comes in and it gets us, hey, you got to submit. You got to be quiet. Don't say anything. Do as you're told. So you'll be safe there. And of course, it is a socialization tool. It's the quickest way to get somebody to stop doing something. And that helps us to fit in, get our needs met by adapting to the social rules and norms of our external environment, be that our family of origin, at work, at school, just walking around there in society. And lastly, it can serve as a self-reflection purpose. This helps motivate us to learn and to grow by changing our attitudes and behaviors when we fail to live up to our own values or standards. So in small amount, it can actually promote learning. In large amount, it shuts down our prefrontal cortex, and then we just cannot learn, and then we'll get stuck in the same repetitive cycles and patterns. So it's all about the dosage. And of course, the big questions usually comes up would be, what's the difference between shame and guilt? So how I see it is that healthy shame or guilt is different than, the type of shame we're talking about. That's very, very painful to deal with and difficult to heal is the toxic shame. So for healthy shame and guilt, it's action and behavior focus. It separates the person from what they did. So this is where I can think, I did something bad. I break a rule that I shouldn't have, or I got into trouble. And this is where we can actually make amends, apologize, and there's actually an opportunity for repair with guilt. With toxic shame, however, it's always very personal. You take it very personally because it hits the core sense of self. It's identity focus instead of behavior and action. It's saying that I am bad and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Right? So that badness immediately take you away from feeling deserving of any love, any care, and any attention. So in a nutshell, healthy shame or guilt help protects, teaches, and help us reconnect to ourselves and to our tribe. It's a reparative mode. Whereas toxic shame, it disconnects, dehumanizes, and it isolates. Okay. And usually, how do we actually learn the difference in shame and guilt? Hopefully through our, how we were being socialized. And these are the main agents of socialization here. In good ways, they can help us feel a sense of safety, belonging, and give us a sense of a good enough identity, right? And it's very age specific, gender, culture, family, socioeconomic class, and the time period that we're born in. And the big ones here, of course, are family or peers, and religion, government, the media, at work, our ethnic background, definitely very strong in AAPI community, any club or social groups that we belong to, and of course, school. There could be more than that, but these are the big ones. So I want to pause here to see how people are doing. Are there any questions, comments, concerns so far? Yes, yeah, very, very beautiful. And I want to say in certain, a lot of certain cases, the healthy shame and the toxic shame, they're blended together. They're in a box. It's very hard to separate the two, right? This is where we're going to have to do a lot of unpacking ourselves. So it's not uncommon to have those two blended in. So part of the healing of shame, or healing these intergenerational trauma, really is to, if it is toxic shame, how can we actually be able to transform it into the healthy version of it, where it is actually guilt, and that we can do something about, versus having it completely debilitate us and freezes us. And yeah, definitely we have a lot more tools now compared to our parents' generation or ancestors. Yes. Now I like to say here, Jennifer, she just chat and say, yes, shame as a tool for protection, but not the most adaptive tools, but what our parents knew at the time. Very, very true. And I'll get into that in, the next couple of slides that are coming up. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions, comments before we continue? Okay. Thank you so much for sharing so far, everyone, for your vulnerability and candidness. Really appreciate it. Okay. Now we're getting into what I call heavy middle. So let's talk about the socialization of AAPI. This is where we all been alluding to. I recently come across this term. I did not, it actually make a lot of sense. That for AAPI, living in between two different cultures, even though you were born here, it leads to what I call complex identity development. And let's break it down a bit here. So let's talk about Asian values, cultures that our parents might have raised us with, or we come in contact with. And of course, these are just generalized descriptors for educational purposes only, and not meant to represent or apply to the entire group of people or culture. So please take it with a grain of salt. But of course, if you resonate with that, I certainly validate your experience. So collectivism. We all been taught that conformity to norms is what's safest and best for the group and for the individual. It's also been taught that we operate upon interdependent type of relationship, deference to authority, respect to elders for sure, and the communication tend to be indirect. Right? Like my mom will come to me and tell me to say something to my sibling, where I'm just like, why can't you just go directly and talk to her? Why do I have to be the middleman? So there's a lot of middle management in between. Of course, a lot of the communication can get lost in translation, and it just, at least in my opinion, lead to a lot more unhealthy relationship than healthy ones. And there is a formal hierarchical relationship where the needs of prioritizing those of the oldest in the family, the man and the group above the young, the woman, and the individual. It's definitely not a very equal, fair, democratic system for sure. And this is because back in the days, most Asian families are like, there's 3 generations living under the same roof. So we need some kind of social order. So if we were going to have to take a vote for every little thing, that would get pretty chaotic. So I can understand why it was set up this way, but things have changed. So we might need something new here to make it work, more equal terms for everyone. And of course, the big one is filial piety obligations and parentification. And it's not unusual for, the oldest child or whoever's the most responsible in the family to parentify the parents, because they're the one that, especially for immigrant parents when they first come here, where their kids tend to be more resourced, at least in the language side of things, to helping to translate and then take care of the younger siblings. And even if you are the only child as well, the parentification can still apply. And usually the family recognition is through external achievements and success. And it's very narrowly defined based upon what the parents or the culture recognizes as good and ideal, right? And they try to pass that on to the children. And therefore, there's a lot of pressure to succeed and achieve, not based upon what you truly is good at and love, but it's on what the parents want, wishes, and see. And the whole notion of saving face. We are taught that it is important to avoid conflict and to keep the peace and harmony. And it is our job to save face for everyone in the family, right? You don't talk crap about them. You don't air dirty laundry out to the public. You keep it inside. And that's where a lot of the stigma comes from, especially when it comes to mental health struggles. And because we don't do that, a lot of things get swept under the rug and that shame gets bigger. And lastly here, we also face intra-group discrimination. That can come in forms of colorism, sexism, fat phobia, education level, job titles, money that we make, what class we come from, disabilities, be it physical or invisible kind, like mental illness. And of course, to judge whether or not you're Asian enough would be your language fluency and how well you understand the culture and its practices. So that's on the Asian side. Now let's look at the American, where they value individuality in terms of self-expression, taking initiative, being independent, and self-referencing. Those are highly encouraged and reinforced. And usually there's little social hierarchy where equality is a very high value that it believes in, right? It's in the Constitution. And the communication tend to be a lot more direct. You go straight to that person, at least you try to talk to them about it rather than going roundabout way of things. And socially, it rewards extroversion, competitiveness, and aggressiveness. So anything that doesn't look like that, it may actually impact your perception of whether or not you're good leadership material. Right? And that could be a shaming experience as well. And beauty standard, Western beauty standards, where for women, the ideal would be to be white, skinny, blonde hair, blue eyes. And for men, it's to be tall, muscular, athletic, and extroverted. So there's a lot of comparison going on here. And some of us might grow up internalize these idealized Western beauty standards to ourselves when we obviously can look very Asian in appearance. So that's another difficulty as well. Racism, of course, racial trauma, microaggression, and xenophobia. And this can show up as the model minority myth, even though it is a positive, I put positive quotation, stereotypes, it also really limits our ability to be our whole selves. And you can also, some have internalized and say, why am I the, stupid Asian? Why aren't I good at math or science like Asians supposed to? Right? That is part of the myth. Perpetual foreigners, though no matter how patriotic we may present or what to say, we're born here, our citizenship is not to be questioned, but still we can be seen as the perpetual foreigner, that this is not, America is not your home. And that, of course, can lead to a lot of anti-Asian hate crimes, especially during the time of COVID. And of course, previously as well, but it definitely highlighted here right now for our generation. And let's not forget about the sexual stereotypes in dating, right? The women, you get projected on with the China doll or the dragon lady stereotypes. And for men, they generally get seen as being undesirable or desexualized. And they have to compensate for it in other ways, like having be in good jobs, having more money to really, really make up for those unfortunate sexual stereotypes. So between these here, you can see someone growing up between these two cultures, you can have receive very mixed messages with competing and conflicting values, norms, and standards. And internally, it causes a lot of conflict. You just don't really know how to really navigate this. It's so big. And like I have the picture here of this woman laying there. You get all these sizes and shape, and you just don't know how to fit them all together, and you just kind of feel crushed by it. On top of that, you can also experience what's called disempowering parenting. And this comes from the paper done over at Boston University back in 2014 that I think worth it if you want to get more details on it. So basically it makes up of 5 components. The first one is abusive parenting. This can include physical, verbal, emotional, sexual, neglect, and abandonment. And that's usually what we see some people discuss a lot, and some they're completely disconnect from it, and they just say, oh, this is just how I was raised. It's pretty normal. Isn't this in everyone's family? The next component is burdening. And because of that collectivism and the story that, especially in immigrant families, the story that your parents sacrificed so much for you and you owe them this debt. So that sense of indebtedness and responsibility, and it can only be paid through academic success, financial achievements, marrying the right person, usually hopefully marrying up to somebody that have a lot more prestige and resources. And of course, elder care. You are their retirement plan and long-term care insurance, essentially. So again, a lot of pressure on the child and children. And knowingly or unknowingly, we're all carrier of intergenerational trauma and shame, and our parents' unfulfilled hopes and dreams. That's the second part. Next one is culturally disjointed. Having different generation needs by itself is already difficult enough, but now you add in the cultural gap where you can have different mindset, expectation, values, rules, and the language barrier in between as well. And that's make it even harder to try to bridge that gap and to understand each other. So that's another form of pressure, and it can be very wounding as well. Disengaged, that's the fourth component. This means the parents can be very emotionally invalidating, especially when you bring up, you're feeling sad and happy and upset, and they're seeing you're like well clothed, you're sheltered. What is there to be upset, sad, angry about? It doesn't make sense to them. And they can be also emotionally unavailable due to having to work multiple jobs, perhaps, or some kind of illnesses that they have themselves. They can also be very dismissive, belittling, ignoring you, or there's generally no praise or expectation of pride unless it reflects well on the family or parent. And lastly is gender prescriptive, especially if you see growing up that your, daughter and their sons, or even in cousins and extended family, you would see who gets the preferential treatment or who gets to be the favor of the family. There's a lot of comparison going on. And when there's comparison, it can lead to despair. And you're also being treated differently in terms of sexual and social control around schooling, work, independence. When can you drive? Should you move out? It's not safe. All those things that we have to negotiate, right? And of course, around our friends and dating choices as well. Would this look good on the family, that sort of thing? And this can lead to a lot of slut shaming, the golden child, scapegoat, and black sheep dynamic in the family. All right. So what does this all add up to? A fractured self, unfortunately. And all of us carry these shame wounds, where break it down into 4 core shame wounds here. First one, it's about the body, right? Our body, what it looks like. Second would be our attachment needs and relationship. And identity, big one. Like I said, for AAPI, we have a very complex identity development, and it usually hit around adolescence to early adulthood, which our brain is not well formed and developed yet, right? And if parents, caregivers, and society and culture did not understand these things, you will not have the guidance and support that you desperately need. And lastly is around competency. These are skills or ability, intelligence. This could be around, whether or not you are neurotypical or neurodivergent as well. And that can be any type of differences compared to others that can cause or reinforce that shame wound. Of course, our education, job, career, and finance success. So I want you to, let's just all take a collective breath here. I know that was pretty heavy over these last 3 slides. So here I would like to do a short activity. With your pen and paper handy, you can write down for yourself, from these 4 core shame wounds, which one do you feel most, that you can identify with most strongly? Again, we all have 4 of them, just in different degree. And some of us feel a lot more in one areas than others. So what makes shame so powerful? It mainly does it to the mechanism of binding. It binds to whatever you feel ashamed of, and then it hides it. So essentially it binds and it hides to whatever we or the socialized agents find unacceptable, and it becomes internalized as toxic shame. Let me give you some examples here. So the first one is any part of ourselves that we cannot control or change, like our identity and our body, which I just talked about in the 4 core shame wounds. And you get internalized messages like, where you feel that you're too much or not enough of something, right? The common notion I keep hearing, and even myself, I feel that I'm not Asian enough, I'm also not American enough. So it's like, where do I fit? Where do I belong? How do I make sense of these 2 parts of me, right? And in bad days, I just simply say, who I am is just not okay. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. And without the perspective of seeing all these external forces and internal forces that we're having to face with, and not having the guidance and the proper resources to help us through this, of course, the beliefs will be like, well, there must be something wrong with me. I can't handle this. When in fact, really have an appreciation of what we are actually dealing with, that's really overpowering and overwhelming. And secondly, it can bind to anything that we consider as bad, right? Any bad emotions. And so again, shame helps to lower the intensity to keep us safe from being rejected or hurt. So let's see how that manifests as mental health symptoms. There's 4 main primary emotions that shame binds to. So again, see if you can identify with any of these here. When shame binds to anger, you get things like feeling angry, but also helpless at the same time. That can also lead to depression, right? It depresses that life force that anger is trying to bring up, but it might feel very dangerous. So all you can do is, depress it. That can also lead anger to actually get misdirected toward the self, where you get suicidal ideation, eating disorders, self-harm, and cutting behavior just to release the tension, just for relief. And when the shame gets too strong, you actually completely disconnect from your own feeling of anger, and you become people-pleasing, codependent, lacking healthy boundaries, and you cannot say no or speak your truth effectively. Even when you try to speak it, it comes out as, of course, angry, you get to blame and shame other people, and then you will not be able to get heard. So it's constant tension between these things. All right, next will be when shame binds to fear. So even though shame, most of the time, it's a freezing function, with fear, it actually intensifies it. It cranks up the notch. This is where you get more of the anxious side of things. You could see things like being hypervigilant, social anxiety, avoidance behavior. It can get too much and you would want to withdraw or silence yourself and not being seen, because that's just a lot safer. If you're not being seen, nobody see you, don't say anything, then you won't get picked on, you won't get shamed. This performance anxiety, imposter syndrome, catastrophizing, having OCD, panic disorders also fall into this category as well. You might have a hard time asserting yourself or also advocating for yourself, right? Just the thought of it would immediately evoke shame and intensifies the fear. Also a lot of self-doubt, rumination. To compensate for this, to mask it, you can actually turn and have perfectionistic tendencies, being overly responsive or over-functioning, right? So if you're able to do that well, if I'm perfect, then of course there's nothing for people to pick upon, and I don't have to feel the shame of potentially making a mistake. Of course, that leads you to be in hyperdrive. You're constantly in this sympathetic overdrive almost, and your brain cannot rest. And shame can also bind to sadness. And this can create complicated grief, where you just immense amount of self-blaming, self-loathing, self-punishing thoughts and belief patterns that keep running around in your head. You will also have a hard time letting go or moving on, and difficulty recognizing or accepting the loss. And you can compensate for it through wishful thinking, fantasy, escaping to that, and of course, addiction behavior when the pains gets too much. And in any of this, it's not isolating, right? They can act in tandem. Sometimes it's just what's showing up on the surface, but once you kind of deal with that, the next layer of shame bind comes up. So you can get really confused. You're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And that's what's happening. And last but not least, when shame binds with joy. This is where we get things like self-sabotaging, or feeling that you're unlucky, that you're a burden or a problem to others. This is where a deep sense of unworthiness comes from. You don't feel like we're worthy of love, goodness, or receiving help. It's like somebody who is sick, but when you try to give them the medicine, they cannot take that in. right? The shame binds to the joy and the happiness so strongly that it rejects all of those things that's coming to it. You can also feel undeserving, don't deserve any forgiveness or happiness. This, again, can work in tandem with the shame binds with sadness as well. Or you could feel guilty for your own success. You won't be able to enjoy it. And if there is a loss involved, there's also survivor guilt there as well. And within that complex, you got to look at and explore any loyalty pact, any promises that one may have made to the person that they lost or that they love. You also have a hard time relaxing or trusting. You can't really play or enjoy life or feel pleasure. And also can't receive or accept any compliments. So, this was quite a lot, but I find it's really helpful to see it all spelled out in this way. So again, here with your pencil and paper, see if you can identify which pole you tend to pull towards. Again, we all experience all of these, but some of them we might actually be more overt in our symptoms. So go ahead and then write them down. You can put it as general as you want or as specific as you want. Or if you feel like there's something here that I did not include, feel free to put that down for yourself. So I'm going to leave it on for a minute or two. I know there's a lot of information on here. And then I'll check in with you. Was everyone able to at least jot down something that they can resonate with and identify with? Okay, thank you, Ramona. All right, yeah, just give me a thumbs up and icons. I know that you got it. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do next is actually going to put them together, what I call your origin story. I want you to put it down in these short sentences here. So fill in the insert in the bracket where I have it in red there. So the statement goes, my core wound of, what is that core shame wound that you just put down, keeps me from what is a dream, a want, or a desire in your life. And it manifests as, what are those mental health symptoms that you just identified? As a way to cope with the pain and avoid the shame while getting my needs met. What are those needs, right? I give an example of safety, belonging, and identity, but there could be others that are important to you. An example of that would be, my core wound of attachment keeps me from being in a fulfilling relationship. It manifests as codependency and people-pleasing as a way to cope with the pain and avoid the shame while getting my needs of love and safety met. Okay, so go ahead and fill that in for yourself. And I'll give everyone a few minutes here. Take one more minute. Do the best you can. Again, it's not a test. There's no wrong or right answer, just whatever really click with you when you read it out loud. It really starting to make sense. Perfect. All right, looks like everyone got it. So Right now, I want to give us an opportunity, any one of you, if you would like to share or read your statement, if you do desire to, and we can be here as witness and just listen. And there's no feedback, no advice, no fixing, any of that, just purely listening. And I can turn off the recording as well. So I would like to invite if anyone here would like to do that. And it comes to healing shame, there are 3 approaches. There's coping, caring, and healing. Each one has their own, I would say, goals and approach, obviously. So the first one, coping. The idea is to manage the symptoms mainly. It's to help soothe and regulate when we are aroused. And the idea is to help us get by day to day, and it's based upon survival mentality, right? Most of us are probably very familiar with what coping is. And generally people will be like, help me cope, I need more coping skills. And that could be certainly helpful in crisis situation for sure. So again, none of these approaches are wrong, bad. They just have their own specialties and goals that they're trying to accomplish. Caring is about treating the symptoms. This is where the main purpose to want to feel normal again and to just function. Right? It's the fix it mentality. See the problem, shame the problem, or addiction, or whatever that is. We just have to go and deal with it. We got to fix it. And the healing path. This is where we actually go to the source, look at it, and transform the wound itself. This gives us a promise of wholeness, coming back together from that fractured identity, and to integrate all the pieces. Nothing gets left behind. It's a change and grow mentality. And I like to call it, it's a path to repair, restore, and renew. Not just fixing it or surviving, that we can actually get to thrive, go beyond that. So for me, healing is really about finding the medicine in the wound. That's where the richness is. So I see it as more kind of like stem cell therapy, right? Versus just going in there, surgically remove things, or just putting a bandage over it. So it is this path here. And I work with it in integratively, right? I'll integrate the cognitive side of things. So psychoeducation is what we're doing right now mostly. There's also the somatic piece, getting into the body movement to really move and to how soften that shame bind to release it. Of course, relationally, being able to hear a different point of view, getting support, love, validation from each other, from other people, to knowing that we're not alone. And working in the imaginal realm, using our right brain, the creative side, images, those things, and very, very powerful tool as well. So together, all 4 of them really help bring all these resources together to really help heal shame. It's also non-pathologizing. You know, I'm not a therapist. I don't work with DSM. I don't need it to build codes or anything like that. I just see these symptoms simply as patterns and what we can do to disrupt it and to move it towards something else that's more constructive versus destructive. We also work with it strength-based. We tend to focus on the strength rather than the problem. We don't ignore it, but we use the strength to meet the difficulties and the challenges. And of course, it will be safe and contained. That's the only way to do it, to keep it within that window of tolerance, as they call it, right? We're keeping it, just kind of dip our feet or toe into the water a little bit and then pull out, just enough. It's very titrated. And of course, the best learning, I believe, is experiential. You retain a lot more, you remember it in your body, you can have better access to it. And based upon the principle of spontaneity and creativity, and mainly how I work with it is psychodramatically. And I love this quote from J.L. Moreno, who is the founder of psychodrama. And he defines spontaneity as an adequate response to a new situation or a new response to an old situation. And healing is a spiral process. It's not linear at all. So the 3-step process here, the first one is to be able to see it, right? We become aware of how the patterns operate externally and internally within us without denial or minimization. And what you just did with putting together those statements, that is part of the seeing process. And the second step is now to feel it. It's be able to have enough strength and resources to process, to grieve and integrate this own feelings, sensation, memories, parts of ourselves that we have to cut off during the socialization process, and to release that toxic shame bind. And that is the bulk of the work there in that second stage. And lastly is healing. As we are able to integrate back all that was disowned, we are able to understand the deeper meaning within the suffering and transform the wound into strength and wisdom. So again, it's a spiral process, and it's a continuous path, really, and we can like go back and forth in between any of these steps, and that is perfectly normal. That is part of the process. Nothing is wrong there. So how would that look like? So to use my example from before of the shame bind of those 4 emotions, let's take anger. We're able to actually transform it into, I call it a skillful and wise protector for our life. For you, anger can, get transformed into something else that will be more useful and helpful in the long run, rather than this very helpless anger. And for fear, we have a chance, an opportunity to transform it into self-assurance and resilience. Right? The more each time we go through the process, we have to transform it into this very solid sense within ourselves, and not just relying on externally on other people to help us with our anxiety and our fears. And for sadness, once you release from the shame bind, you can actually get to access deep self-compassion and forgiveness. And of course, when joy gets released from shame, sorry about that. When sadness gets released from shame, you get access to great passion, love, and hope. All those things get returned to you. Your capacity to be able to feel it and take it in and enjoy it, because it is yours. It's not lost. There's possibility to reclaim it for yourself. All right, so this next part here will be to put together the statement for your healing journey, what that might be. So the statement is, my journey of getting, again, what is that dream, want, and desire in your life, and needs met, is to heal my core wound by learning to transform those symptoms and patterns into strength and wisdom. Again, you can put into your own words. My example is my journey of being in a fulfilling relationship that feels safe and loving is to heal my core wound of attachment by learning to transform the codependency and people-pleasing patterns into being a skillful and loving protector for myself and others. Okay. So again, I will give you a few minutes here to put together your own healing journey statements. How's everyone doing? So same as before, I can pause the recording here if anyone wants to share their statement.